The moment you've been waiting for has arrived. Danielle Smith just dropped a constitutional bombshell that has sent shockwaves through Ottawa's corridors of power. This isn't just another political squabble. This is Alberta declaring economic war against the federal government, and what happens next could literally reshape the future of Canada as we know it. The Premier just activated her most controversial weapon, the Sovereignty Act, in a move so bold that even her critics are calling it unprecedented. While Pierre Trudeau once said the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation, Danielle Smith is saying Ottawa has no business in Alberta's oil fields, and she's prepared to go to the Supreme Court to prove it. Before we dive into this explosive story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because this federal-provincial showdown is just getting started, and you don't want to miss a single development. Drop a comment below telling me what you think about Alberta's bold move, and give this video a thumbs up if you believe provinces should have the right to protect their own resources from federal overreach. Let's set the stage here. What we're witnessing isn't just politics as usual. This is a constitutional crisis in the making. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says her government is looking to challenge the proposed federal greenhouse gas emissions cap, including by passing legislation to give the province exclusive authority over emissions data and banning federal employees from designated oil and gas sites. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about a provincial government literally prohibiting federal officers from entering facilities within their own borders. This is the kind of standoff that makes constitutional lawyers reach for their history books. The federal emissions cap isn't just some abstract environmental policy. It's an economic sledgehammer aimed directly at Alberta's heart. The proposed oil and gas emissions cap is, in reality, a federal government-imposed cap on oil and gas production and, if implemented, will result in a production cut of at least 1 million barrels a day of oil and gas in Alberta, while effectively prohibiting any production growth 1 million barrels per day. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the entire oil production of countries like Angola or Ecuador. We're talking about potentially crippling Alberta's economic engine. Now, here's where things get really interesting from an economic analysis standpoint. The Conference Board of Canada forecasts that royalties in Alberta will drop by $1.4 billion to $2.8 billion, KD $2 billion to $4 billion in 2030 to 31 under the emissions cap. Those aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's funding for hospitals, schools, infrastructure, and social programs. When Ottawa implements policies that cost Alberta billions in revenue, they're essentially asking Albertans to subsidize federal climate policy with their own tax dollars and job losses. But Danielle Smith isn't backing down quietly. Her response has been nothing short of defiant. No longer will Alberta ask permission from Ottawa to be prosperous and free. We will not have our resources landlocked or our energy phased out of existence by a virtue-signaling Prime Minister. These aren't the words of a politician trying to find middle ground. This is a declaration of economic independence. The Sovereignty Act itself represents one of the most controversial pieces of legislation in recent Canadian history. What Smith is proposing goes beyond typical federal-provincial disputes. The motion seeks to ensure no unauthorized access to these facilities. It also prohibits unauthorized access to these facilities. It declares emissions data proprietary to Alberta and mandates that disclosure be controlled by the province. Essentially, Alberta is creating its own parallel regulatory system that directly contradicts federal authority. From a constitutional perspective, this sets up a fascinating legal battle. Alberta has exclusive jurisdiction to manage the rate of non-renewable natural resources production and operational aspects of their development in the province. This is where Section 92A of the Constitution Act becomes crucial. Alberta isn't just making a political argument, they're making a legal one based on constitutional division of powers. What makes this situation even more volatile is the timing. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is reacting to the results of the federal election by taking a swipe at the newly elected Liberal government and promising to protect the province against future hostile acts from Ottawa. With a newly elected Liberal government in Ottawa, the battle lines are being drawn for what could be years of constitutional warfare. The economic implications extend far beyond Alberta's borders. It's already a very complicated system. In my experience, it's already driving investment away. When investors see this kind of regulatory uncertainty and federal-provincial conflict, they start looking at other jurisdictions. We could be witnessing the beginning of a massive capital flight from Canada's energy sector. Smith's strategy appears to be multi-layered. She's not just challenging this specific emissions cap, she's challenging the entire framework of federal environmental regulation over provincial resources. Smith called the policy a deranged vendetta against the oil and gas producing province. Those are fighting words that signal this isn't going to be resolved through quiet diplomatic channels. The broader political context makes this even more explosive. The Premier has said she'd hold it in 2026. There's already talk of a potential secession referendum, and Smith's hardline stance against Ottawa is only fueling those separatist sentiments. We could be looking at a scenario where federal overreach actually pushes Alberta toward seriously considering leaving Confederation. What's particularly striking about Smith's approach is how she's framing this as a matter of principle rather than just economics. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, grappling with a noisy separatist movement in her province after the federal Liberals won last month's election, says Ottawa will need to abolish several key policies if it wants a working relationship with her government. This isn't negotiation. This is an ultimatum. The legal experts are divided on whether Alberta's Sovereignty Act can actually withstand constitutional challenges. Some of the measures outlined by Smith likely wouldn't stand in court, such as the ban on federal officers entering oil and gas facilities. But here's the thing. Smith might not care if she loses in court. Sometimes the political value of the fight is more important than the legal outcome. From an economic analysis perspective, what we're seeing is a classic case of regulatory federalism gone wrong. When federal policies impose massive costs on specific regions while providing benefits to others, you create the conditions for exactly this kind of rebellion. Ottawa's emissions cap might achieve its environmental goals, but at the cost of potentially fracturing the Federation. The international implications can't be ignored either. Canada is already struggling with its reputation as a reliable energy supplier due to pipeline delays and regulatory uncertainty. Now we have a major producing province openly defying federal environmental regulations. How does that look to international investors and trading partners? Smith's timing is also strategically brilliant, with Donald Trump back in the White House. And potentially more friendly to Canadian energy exports, Alberta might be calculating that they have more leverage now than they've had in years. If the Americans are willing to buy Alberta oil and gas, who needs Ottawa's approval? The precedent this sets is enormous. If Alberta successfully defies federal environmental regulations through the Sovereignty Act, what stops other provinces from doing the same with policies they don't like? We could be looking at the beginning of the end of effective federal governance in Canada. What's most fascinating from a political science perspective is how Smith is using constitutional law as a weapon of mass political destruction. She's not just challenging specific policies, she's challenging the entire concept of federal supremacy in areas where the Constitution gives provinces jurisdiction. The economic data supports Alberta's position in many ways. The province generates enormous wealth for the federal treasury through equalization and taxes, yet sees policies implemented that directly attack their primary economic engine. From Alberta's perspective, they're being asked to pay for their own economic destruction. Looking ahead, this confrontation is likely to escalate before it's resolved. Smith has shown she's willing to push constitutional boundaries, and the newly elected Liberal government in Ottawa can't afford to appear weak on environmental policy. We're heading for a collision that could reshape Canadian federalism. The ultimate question isn't whether Alberta will win this specific battle, it's whether Canada can survive as a functional federation when provinces start openly defying federal authority. What Danielle Smith has done isn't just about emissions caps or oil and gas regulation. She's fired the first shot in what could become a much larger war over the future of Canadian federalism itself. This story is far from over, and the implications will ripple through Canadian politics for years to come. The next few months will determine whether we're witnessing the beginning of a new era of cooperative federalism or the start of Canada's constitutional unraveling. Either way, Danielle Smith has just changed the game forever.